Alright, so in today's video I want to talk about population and give us a general overview of what we've learned in this unit. So we're going to start with Learning Goal 1. Learning Goal 1 states, describe world population patterns and describe how human and physical features affect the world's settlement patterns. Settlement patterns are where people live. So do they live in cities? Are they crowded? Or do they live on farms? Are they farmers? Do they have lots of space? What changes those settlement patterns? And we're going to talk about human characteristics and physical characteristics that affect those patterns. So let's move on here. Alright, this again is a density map. Density, population density tells us how crowded somewhere is. So density equals, and this is a generalization, this is making it too simple maybe, but density equals crowded. If it's very dense, it's crowded. If it's not very dense, it's not very crowded. So we can make some generalizations. If it's too hot, that equals not crowded. Alright, let's color in some places that are too hot, and I'll color them in green. The Outback, Australia, too hot. The Sahara Desert, too hot. The Namib and the Kalahari Desert, too hot. Alright, now let me change colors here. If it's too cold, that's going to equal not crowded. People aren't going to live there if it's too cold. Okay, and this is more extreme, and I'll color some places that are too cold. Okay, and it's high latitude places, so Siberia, it's all this high latitude right here. It's too cold, it's not going to be crowded. Right there, it's too cold. Canada, too cold. Canada has a large population, but it all lives further south, near the US border. Alright, there's some other physical features that people are going to avoid in general, like mountains. You're not going to live in a mountain, or on a mountain, excuse me. Right here where the red is, this is rainforest. Alright, there's a rainforest there, so it's not going to be very crowded in the middle of a tropical rainforest. Alright, they are building, or they have built, a highway through the Amazon rainforest, so that is going to increase population density. Alright, in general, where do people live? People live near resources. Okay, and those resources might be water or oil. Alright, and saying people live near resources, that's a very general thing to say. But in general, people are going to live near water. So if you have a test question that's asking you, where do people live? Where do people live? It's always going to be near water. Either fresh water for agriculture or for transportation and trade. But generally, people live near water. Now that changes with other factors like technology. But in the most general sense, people do live near water. Okay, people also live where soil is arable. And again, arable means farmable. You can farm on it. If you have a vast area where it's like just no good soil, you can't plant anything there, people aren't going to live there. They need to live near arable soil. And that goes hand in hand with water. That's why all the original civilizations were river valleys, because it provided water and it provided arable soil. Alright, in general, people need to live near mild climates, right? And we already went over that. You don't want to live where it's too hot or too cold. Alright, so this video is going to show us the rapid population growth in the last 200 years. I'm going to go ahead and skip to the part I want you to see.
We've grown from 1 billion to 7 billion, and it only took 200 years. Will we keep going like this? Probably not. The UN says we'll level out at 10 billion by the end of the century. So as we continue to grow...
So why do we have that dramatic growth in the last 150 or 200 years? There's two main reasons. It's improved agriculture and improved healthcare. So antibiotics, right? People live 70, 80 years old in developed countries now. They used to live, 30, 40, 50 years or whatever. So things have changed dramatically, and that has caused the population to boom in the last 150 years. Factors that affect settlement patterns. So people do tend to live near areas of political or economic importance. And economic importance is probably one of the best or biggest pull factors that we discuss. Right? People are going to move where the jobs are. And that just makes sense. Alright, people live along transportation routes. So rivers, that's a physical feature. Canals, that's man-made. And railroads, that's a human feature as well, man-made. Traditionally, towns, cities, areas of importance have tended to develop near areas of transportation, right? If people can get there, there's going to be settlement. All right, technology can also expand areas of settlement. So in the United States, before the railroad was developed, it was very difficult to travel west. Once the development of the railroad and that started moving people west, westward expansion grew at a much quicker rate. All right, and people are more likely to want to live in a city now. Urbanization. People like to live near cities. They like to be in cities. There's a lot of pull factors for cities. The jobs are there. The nightlife is there. Whatever it is that attracts you to a city, it's more common to want to live in a city than out in the country these days. And that trend is speeding up. And this shows you the number of urban areas over 10 million from 1950 to 1975. So basically just the size of how many mega cities were there throughout history. 1950 we had 2 mega cities, New York and Tokyo. 1975 we were up to 4, including Shanghai and Mexico City. All right, by 2005 that list had ballooned up to 20, and now it's up to 22. And that list is only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Cities are becoming larger as a part of urbanization. Alright, so the next thing I want to talk about is largely Learning Goal 3. We're skipping over Learning Goal 2 here a little bit. Learning Goal 3, as you can see, largely deals with population pyramids. This was the assignment we did for that. And all the stuff you can gain and know just by looking at a population pyramid. So let's go ahead and look at what a population pyramid looks like. Let's look at the population of Sudan. Okay, so this is the population pyramid of Sudan, and let's go ahead and switch it to, present time, pretty much 2015. All right, so you look at that population pyramid, and what does a population pyramid tell us? That's one thing we do need to know for sure. All right, so let's go ahead and write that out. A population pyramid shows the age and gender of a population. Alright, so it shows the age and gender of a population, and it's usually the age and gender of a country. Usually you see population pyramids of countries. Alright, and this one is, you see how it has percentages at the bottom, 2.5%, 5%, 7.5%. A lot of the times it'll be in millions. It'll tell you the actual number. This particular website I'm using shows percentages, and that really doesn't change the overall shape of the pyramid. Alright, so here we have a large amount of 0 to 4-year-olds. Alright, what does that mean? In the Sudan, if they have that many 0 to 4-year-olds, the fertility rate is high. Alright, so I'm just going to say the fertility rate is high. And how do we know that? Well, like I said, there's a large number of 0 to 4-year-olds, but let's compare that to the childbearing ages. And let's say that's, roughly in this area. Right? This is the childbearing age, roughly. But this is the general childbearing age. If this green section is more narrow than the red section, that means the fertility rate is high. Fewer women are having more babies. And this is in a developing country, right? The sub-Saharan Africa is a developing country. So let's go ahead and look at a developed country and see what changes. Alright, so a developed country would be like the United Kingdom or England. We all know that that is developed, right? Alright, you see how that is different? That's very different. And that's for a lot of reasons. Alright, the fertility rate here is low. And again, we know that. Alright, so this country is developed. Alright, let's look at another developing country or less developed country. We're going to look at Venezuela. So Venezuela, you can tell the fertility rate is higher. It's obviously not as high as Sudan, which we looked at earlier, but it is very high. So let's look at what developed versus developing means. Let's go ahead and look at that real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a T-chart. And we'll put developed on one side, and we'll put developing on the other side. So a developed country is going to have good infrastructure. A developing country is going to have bad, or maybe I shouldn't say bad, maybe I should say worse infrastructure. Alright, we're going to ask yourself, what the heck is infrastructure, right? What is infrastructure? I don't understand that. So let's go ahead and define that. Infrastructure is basically usually stuff that the government provides that keeps a country operating, keeps it going good. So I'm not going to write the definitions out because I think it's better just to write examples of infrastructure. Alright, so again, it's stuff that the country needs, it's got to have in order to operate and function well. So I'm going to go ahead and write a few examples out. A lot of people say, oh, infrastructure is buildings. Infrastructure is much more than that. Infrastructure is roads. It might be the power grid. And when I say power grid, people are like, what are you talking about? So I'm going to go ahead and write electricity. Infrastructure is also education. It might be healthcare. Alright, so these are good examples of infrastructure. There are, of course, many other examples of infrastructure, but this is what we're going to go with for now. Alright, so back for our developed versus developing. So a developed country has good infrastructure. Developing has worse infrastructure. A developed country has a good economy. A developing country has a worse economy. Okay, and the indicator we use to decide that is GDP per capita. Alright, and this basically tells us the quality of the economy or the size of the economy. GDP is the value of all goods and services produced within a country in a given year, and per capita divides it by per person. So the higher your GDP per capita, the stronger your economy. For example, the United States has somewhere near 40,000, and a country like the Congo might be somewhere near $400 or $500 GDP per capita. So that's kind of a good indicator. Okay, a developed country might have a low fertility rate. Alright, and like we talked about those population pyramids, developed countries tend to have narrow bases at the bottom. They're not having lots of babies. And that has to do with a lot of different factors. But developing countries do have higher fertility rates. Alright, for example, a country like Japan might have a fertility rate, and they're very developed, of 1.3, meaning each woman only has about 1.3 babies in her lifetime. Right, that's a very low fertility rate. America is closer to 2. It's like 1.9, I think. A developing country could be 5, could be 6, much higher, which gives it that wide base that we see. Alright, and a developed country, one more indicator here that we'll go ahead and put, has a good educational system. Right, so they value education. So the mean years of school, the average years of school that you're going to go to in a developed country might be 13 or 14 years. I think in America it's 13 years. And a developing country, it could be as low as 3 or 4 years. So they're going to have a worse education. And that contributes to that fertility rate, right? The more educated women are and the more educated people are in general, the lower that fertility rate tends to get. So those two things are very closely related. Alright, one thing I left out of here, and hopefully you can see the bottom of the screen here, a developed country has this is a term I hope you guys are familiar with, is a high standard of living. And that's one of those terms that is kind of hard to define. A developing country has a low or a lower standard of living. And the way I do describe that, and it's hard to define like I said, is if you can decide where you're going to be born, you're going to want to be born in a country with a high standard of living. It is much better to be poor in America with a high standard of living, good infrastructure, good economy, than it is to be born poor in a developing country with a low standard of living like Haiti or Congo or Sudan or any number of countries. Alright, I'm also going to draw, and I'm going to switch colors, the general shape of the population pyramids in developed countries versus developing countries. So a developed country might be like this, kind of an inverse pyramid with a low fertility rate, or it might be maybe even like this, kind of like square, and oh, they're having as many babies, maybe 2 babies per woman. And a developing country could be like, whoa, we're having lots of babies, right? It's very wide at the bottom, and it's not very wide at the top, so they have a high fertility rate. Alright, so for the last part of the review video, we're going to talk about globalization. Alright, so globalization, this is a big, long, fancy definition. Go ahead and read it if you want. But all it is the idea that the world is a connected place. What happens on the other side of the world affects us here in the United States of America, and vice versa.
In the West, globalization has also led to the rise of a service economy. In the US and Europe, most people now work not in agriculture or manufacturing, but in some kind of service sector. Healthcare, retail, education, entertainment, information technology, internet videos about world history, etc.
We want to focus on East Asia. All right, and when we say East Asia, you remember South Asia is India. All right, so it says East Asia emerges as a global trade power due to abundance of resources, large labor forces, and low wages. All right, so one reason that global connectivity or globalization has affected East Asia is because the United States has shipped many of their jobs overseas, or one way to put it is outsourced, right? A lot of American jobs have gone overseas, whether it be manufacturing jobs, especially like textile manufacturing. So a lot of clothes are manufactured overseas. Electronics are manufactured overseas. And that's because people in many parts of Asia are willing to work for a lower wage than American companies would have to pay, or even European companies would have to pay workers in Europe or America. So that has affected our prices at home, our labor force, our settlement patterns. Cities that were once manufacturing centers, they're no longer as large. All right, so outsourcing. One place you're going to see the word outsourcing a lot, one place outsourcing has occurred, is South Asia. And South Asia equals India, right? When we say South Asia, we're usually talking about India. And a lot of call center jobs like helplines have been outsourced to India. People in India speak English and are highly educated. And it is cheaper for a call center to be operated by people in India. The wages are lower than to have that here in America. So that affects, again, jobs, and it creates jobs in India. So in India, it's bringing wages up. People are coming out of poverty. In America, some jobs are being lost, but that's just part of globalization, right? Okay, industrialization. Industrialization, America used to be all about industrialization, manufacturing. After World War II, we were a very industrial country. Okay, and soon after, though, we started shipping all those industrial jobs overseas. Industrialization is occurring in developing countries. All right, one of the problems with globalization is it increases, like I said, it increases industrialization in these developing countries. And maybe, like America and Europe didn't have restrictions on pollution and labor laws at first, well, these developing countries don't have those restrictions. And so this increased industrialization is increasing the pollution dramatically. All right, some of the social impacts of globalization. Cultural diffusion and cultural convergence.
Moving around the world, it's not surprising that globalization also means cultural blending. When people move, they don't just give up their literary, culinary, artistic, and musical traditions. Globalized culture is a bit of a paradox, though, because some people see culture today as increasingly Americanized, right? Like, Friends is currently broadcast in over 100 countries. You can find Diet Coke for sale deep in the jungles of Madagascar. The NBA is huge in China. There are fewer languages spoken today, and probably less cultural diversity. But on the other hand, an individual's access to diverse cultural experience has never been greater. Bollywood movies, Swedish hip-hop, Brazilian soap operas, highlights from Congolese football matches, these are all available to us.
So for many of these countries where these manufacturing jobs are going to, these people have jobs, like in China, like Foxconn, a lot of these factories, people have jobs where they once didn't have jobs, so that is increasing the standard of living. Many, many millions of people have been pulled out of poverty due to globalization and the fact that many of the manufacturing jobs from developed countries have moved to developing countries.
Environment? Well, here's where we have to imagine the future, because if some superbug shows up tomorrow and it travels through all these global trade routes and kills every living human, then globalization will have been very bad for human history, specifically by ending it. If climate change continues to accelerate and displaces billions of people and causes widespread famines and flooding, then we will remember this period of human history as short-sighted, self-indulgent, and tremendously destructive.